Morning, everyone. We start with the news that the Met Police are reviewing hundreds of cases of alleged sexual offences and domestic abuse involving its own staff. That comes after the serving officer, PC David Carrick, was revealed as one of Britain's most prolific sex offenders after admitting to dozens of offences against women, including 24 counts of rape over 18 years. The Metropolitan Police is reviewing more than 1,600 cases of alleged sexual offence or domestic violence involving its own officers and staff. A total of 1,633 cases involving 1,071 officers and staff are set to be reviewed. Sir Mark Rowley announced all 45,000 Met officers and staff would be rechecked for previously missed offences. I was standing by for us outside of Scotland Yard this morning. Oh, my goodness me, how many bad apples are there? Good morning, Ivor.
Morning, Kay. Yeah, this awful case involving PC David Carrick will obviously have huge ramifications for the Met in terms of its vetting and recruitment process. And to that end, the Met has already announced this wholesale review of all allegations of sexual offences and domestic abuse involving its officers and staff over the last 10 years. And the number of cases that involves is staggering. More than 1,633 cases involving more than 1,000 officers and staff. So clearly some people have had multiple allegations made against them. These accusations range from arguments right up to most serious sexual crimes. The force has said that while these inquiries are being made into these historic allegations, those people involved, those whom they concern, will for the most part remain in post. But if anything raises a red flag or any concerns are raised, then their status will be rapidly reconsidered. But alongside that, all 45,000 of the Met staff and officers will be checked again, rechecked to make sure no offending was missed. It's a huge undertaking, huge administrative undertaking that will take a long time, but that's what is clearly needed if the Met wants to restore the public's trust and confidence. And Sir Mark Rowley, the Commissioner, himself has already said that he believes there are more than 100 officers, hundreds of officers, corrupt officers within the force, and this is an attempt to weed them out. Now, as we know, PC David Carrick 9 times came to the police's attention during his career after allegations were made against him, including allegations of rape, but not once did he face any criminal sanctions or misconduct hearings. This morning at 9 o'clock, he will face a misconduct hearing, clearly a case of not just better late than never, but shutting the stable door long after the horse has bolted. OK,
Ivor, thank you. Talking about that story with a senior Met Police officer in just a short time here on Sky News. Meantime, thousands of teachers in England and Wales are set to walk out of classrooms over pay after the largest education union reached the threshold required to take strike action. At 20 past, I'm going to be speaking to the Education Secretary. That's Gillian Keegan. Also on the programme, Royal Mail bosses are preparing to give evidence to the Commons Business Committee this morning. We'll have more on that. And postal workers have been striking since August last year due to ongoing disputes over pay. The Communications Workers Union also calls strikes on important days throughout the festive period. Both CWU boss Dave Ward and Chief Exec of Royal Mail, that's Simon Thompson, have spoken to this programme during the industrial action in the run-up to Christmas.
The company itself is also destroying Royal Mail as we know it. They have no intention of continuing Royal Mail, one of the most iconic British companies that is around. They are destroying it. They want to turn it into just another parcel courier. And I'm going to say to you today, the people who are running this company have got so much to answer for. The levels of harassment and intimidation and threats that are going on in workplaces every day would be unacceptable in any business. And yet it's the leaders of the company who are doing this to ordinary, decent postal workers. And we're not going to put up with this. We cannot accept what they're doing.
We have been talking for 7 months to try and get this situation resolved around change. And for the first 6 months, the union did not engage in those discussions at all. I then offered them the opportunity of joining me with ACAS, and I have to say that did eventually happen. And a big thank you to the team of ACAS. I thought they were professional and dedicated to try and help us resolve this situation. It took the CWU nearly a month to take me up on that offer. We then spent 3 weeks in intensive talks, including weekends, which I also participated in. And at the end of that, they rejected our change agenda completely out of hand.
So that was both sides of the dispute with the postal strikes that we've seen before and indeed after Christmas. Both sides speaking to a select committee of MPs later on today, just after 9 o'clock. We'll bring that to you, of course, here on The Breakfast Show. And police urging people in the southwest of England to only travel if essential. That's what we're hearing this morning after reports of more than 100 road-related incidents within 5 hours. The majority was as a result of the freezing weather conditions. Meanwhile, the UK Health Security Agency has issued a level 3 cold alert. That was on Monday in response to severe winter weather. It's advised people with pre-existing medical conditions or over the age of 65 to heat their home to at least 18 degrees Celsius. Met Office have issued this yellow warning of snow and remain in place for parts of the UK, and has warned that treacherous conditions could also lead to slips and falls on icy surfaces, and urged drivers and cyclists to beware of icy patches on untreated roads. Let's get more. Should be Joe standing by for us this morning. Hi, Joe. It's not looking good, is it?
It's certainly not. I mean, it was only just a couple of days ago we were looking at these very mild, wet and windy conditions. And now, of course, we're in the grip of a freeze. And certainly overnight, temperatures have dropped below freezing for just about all of the country, and as low as -8, even -9 in some places. So, of course, where you've got any moisture at all, you're going to find icy stretches at that point. Obviously, the gritters will have been out, attempting to look at the major routes and highways, but you can't get everywhere. And it's little country roads, with pavements or even just patches of tarmac where you're going to find those that ice. So you do need to watch out for that. There's obviously a falling hazard there. The cold weather's going to stay with us, or the level 3 alert stays with us until 9 o'clock on Friday morning. So there is yet more to come. And of course, anything that moves through this very cold air is likely to fall as sleet or snow, and also likely to turn to ice as soon as it hits those sub-zero temperatures. So certainly this morning we've got showers over parts of Scotland, quite a few down the west coast as well, into northwestern parts of England, into parts of Wales. And then this feature in the southwest, the one that's caused all the problems, it's still there, edging its way now across Dartmoor towards Exeter. And that is still giving some snow on its leading edge, sleet behind that, and rain right down towards the south and the southwest. So that moves its way through. It's going to take a while to clear away. And then there's another feature coming into the far north of Scotland later in the day, which is likely to bring some snow, possibly some blizzard conditions as well.
OK, is that your dog, Joe?
It is, yes.
I think he wants a walk.
I tried.
Yeah, you've probably got time to nip him round the park before we chat again in the next hour. Thanks very much. Now, the latest unemployment figures have just been published from the ONS. Should we find out what they're saying? Paul is standing by for us with the details. Hey, Paul, tell us more.
Morning, Kate. Yes, figures from November for the labour market in the UK, and they show a slight rise in unemployment, up 0.2% to 3.7%. And perhaps slightly worrying, a reduction in the number of vacancies in the economy, 75,000 fewer jobs being advertised, leaving over 1 million jobs still out there. We know employers have been struggling to find staff, but this would indicate fewer jobs being advertised, unemployment rising, that the slowing economy is starting to bite on the labour market, which has been one of the low unemployment rate, one of the very, very few crumbs of comfort for the economy. Should say pay is rising. These numbers show that average pay is on the rise, up by 6.4% in the quarter to November. So the demands of employees facing rising inflation at over 10% is being met by employers, but there's a big gap between the private and the public sector. Private sector pay up 7.2% on average, while public sector pay was up just 3.3%. That, of course, fueling this industrial discontent we're seeing, the latest teachers you've already been discussing this morning. But those pay rises, while they sound good, against inflation over 10%, it means in real terms, against CPI, consumer price inflation, real terms wages are actually 3.8% down. So more money being paid, but the real effect of that in your wallet is a reduction in the amount of money being felt. Another number, just to bear in mind as we go on this morning through the rest of this week, 467,000 working days lost to strike action in November. That's the highest in 12 years. 1.6 million working days lost to strikes, just 6 months, June to November. We know there'll be plenty more to come in the next few months.
So just to clarify that, 500,000 days lost to strikes in November?
Yes, that's right. That's the these numbers, they are...
Oh, yep. So he was just... So sadly, we've lost Paul. We'll come back to him shortly. But almost 500,000 strike days lost in November. Goodness. Now, an independent review into how the murderer, Damien Bendel, was dealt with by probation officers has found multiple failings in their handling of the case at every stage. The 32-year-old was given a whole life order for the murder of his partner, Terry Harris, her 2 children, and their friend in Killemarsh in Derbyshire. Fraser Maud has more.
See you.
The calmness of a killer.
Well, I know it's going to happen when you go to prison, obviously, but again...
Why? What have you done? Have you done something to anyone else?
Yeah.
What have you done?
I've murdered 4 people.
This is Damien Bendel handing himself into police after the brutal murders of his partner, her 2 children, and one of their friends. He had a history of violence, but at the time of the killings, he was on probation, serving a suspended prison sentence for arson. Now, a damning report by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Probation has highlighted how the service's handling of Bendel's case fell well below the necessary standard, that the risk he posed had been badly underestimated.
We found that at every stage of the probation service's assessment and management of Damien Bendel, the quality of that work was of an unacceptable standard.
Bendel was living under curfew with his girlfriend, Terry Harris, and her 2 children, John Paul and Lacey Bennett, despite previous convictions for violent crime and allegations of domestic abuse made by a former partner. He murdered all 3, as well as 11-year-old Connie Gent, who was having a sleepover at the house. The probation service allowed Bendel to give this address to the courts as the place where he would serve out his 5-month curfew without first speaking to Terry Harris, without visiting the property, and without carrying out any domestic abuse inquiries. The review highlighted the fact that Bendel had previously served 3 prison sentences between 2011 and 2019, 2 for violent robbery, 1 for assaulting a prison officer. It says that Bendel was incorrectly assessed as posing a medium risk to the public and a low risk to partners and to children. In reality, it says he should have been assessed as being of high risk of serious harm. Pre-sentence reports for his arson conviction also failed to include safeguarding or domestic abuse checks. The failings essentially meant that the judge who gave Bendel the suspended sentence, which allowed him to commit the murders, did not have the full facts about the risk he posed. Fraser Maud, Sky News, Killemarsh.
Still to come on the programme for you this morning as teachers in England and Wales become the latest to join the wave of winter strikes. Speaking to the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, in just a moment. Also speaking to the former Scotland Yard Detective Superintendent as a serving police officer admits dozens of rapes and sexual offences. And a quarter to the hour, speaking to Helen Roberts, Met Office meteorologist. The weather is going to be terrible today, especially if you're in the southwest or up into the wilds of Scotland. More on that to come in just a moment. A British man has been confirmed among at least 70 people who were killed in a plane crash in Nepal. The Foreign Office says it's supporting the family of Rowan Callum Crichton, who was aboard the Yeti Airlines flight 691, which crashed 2 days ago. Neville is standing by for us now. At first, it had been thought that no Brits were on board, thought that he was an Irish national, sadly one of the many that perished on this aircraft.
That's right, Kay. Over 70 bodies have been retrieved from the crash site. They had to abandon the search and rescue operations yesterday in the evening because of inclement weather and the dangerous terrain, because rescue teams had to rappel down almost 200 metres down into the gorge onto the riverbed where some of the wreckage has been strewn across the area. Now there are 45 bodies have been transferred back to Kathmandu, where they will be given to family members, and each home has a tragic story of their own. One is of the co-pilot Anju Kathawada, who was married to a pilot who died in a similar plane crash 16 years ago. And there is now a lot of anger and questions are being raised about the safety regulations of the Nepalese aviation industry. There is the treacherous weather, the mountainous regions of Nepal, but also not much of investment into safety and regulations and mechanism being put in place by the Nepalese aviation industry. The Prime Minister Prachanda has ordered a 5-member committee inquiry into the cause of the crash, and they have to give in their report within 45 days of this. In the meanwhile, the people and the country are grappling with this tragedy.
OK, thanks very much indeed. Thank you. What's his name? This is the British man who was killed, sadly lost his life when that plane came down on Saturday. Teachers in England and Wales are going to go on strike, wave of winter strike action. Gillian Keegan is the Education Secretary with me this morning. Good morning. Thank you for joining us on the programme. How could you avoid these strikes?
Well, we've been doing what we can. When I very first started the job on the 25th of October, I had, the first day, I had a letter from all 4 unions, and it basically said we need an extra £2 billion next year and the year after to pay for these increases in pay and also the cost of living, to help schools with the cost of living. So that was the first challenge I was given, and we did secure that in the autumn statement. So it's deeply disappointing, actually, that one of the unions, it is only one, has, just scraped over the line to get, I think under half the teachers voted for it, but about 53% turnout, 90% voted for it. So I think it's just under half that actually voted to strike.
Yeah, but nevertheless,
in one union,
they
yes.
Did, and it will impact on many of our children. Did pay come up in your last meeting when you met with the NEU? Because I had the leader, the General Secretary, and she said that you'd never even talked about pay when she came in to see you.
We talked about pay. We talked about mostly in relation to the pay review body of next year. So what is happening at the moment is the submissions that we all put in, and everyone puts a submission in, the unions, the employers, the government. They take lots of other inputs in terms of recruitment, retention, what's happening in other sectors, etc. And then they look at all of that. We've got to have that in by the 27th of January. So that's what we're all working on, to make sure that we can see if we can try and come closer together when we look at pay for the next pay review body.
But Mary Bousted said, and this is what she said, we talked about that education was very important, that teachers are very important, and we talked a bit about inflation, and we counted that wage rises are causing inflation. But no, we didn't talk about money, and we didn't talk about money either for this year or next year.
Well, what happened is we had a sort of wider discussion, and then the officials who were going to go through all the line-by-line submissions for the 27th followed up with a meeting on the Friday. Then we've got another meeting this week on Wednesday, and there's another meeting with officials all day.
Did you talk about money with the unions?
We talked about it in general, but we didn't go through line by line of the submission, because they were starting to do that with the officials. But we talked about, the principles of what the
Do you not think it would have been important
is.
to talk about money, and potentially you could have fended off this strike?
Well, what we've done in terms of money is get the budget to pay for the independent pay review bodies. And one thing that's important when you look at, because there's a lot of information on pay. So there's a 5% rise for experienced teachers and 8.9% rise for new teachers. That's on the bands. The way a lot of public sector pay works is you then get progression within the bands. So if you actually look at almost every newly qualified teacher and about 40% of experienced teachers will actually be be getting up to 15.9% because it will also include the progression award as well they get, either for promotion or for progression over time. And then, of course, you've got other benefits as well. So it is, you know, an offer that the independent pay review body has put together. It's a lot higher than we put in. It's a lot higher than schools budgeted.
But you're the
and
Education Secretary.
Accepted.
The unions come in to see you. Why don't you talk about money?
Well, we did talk about money, but
They're saying that you didn't.
Well, they also said I only met with them for 45 minutes. I was with them an hour and 10 minutes. But we did talk about money. But
so
we didn't.
They're wrong to say that.
We didn't negotiate the pay. That's not what we're there to do. We didn't negotiate pay, but what we did do was talk about some of the challenges, workload challenges as well, we talked about. And we've gone through for next year, and we will, by now they will have gone through, but there's I think it's a 6-hour meeting that's scheduled on Friday to go through line by line as well.
So she's being disingenuous to say that she came and you wouldn't talk about money?
I mean, you know, we talked about money, we talked about workload. Actually, the number one reason teachers leave, and the retention rates are actually the second lowest, actually, the numbers for last year since 2010 at the rate level. But the number one reason teachers leave is workload and flexibility. They want more flexibility, job shares, being able to do part-time, that kind of thing. So they're the things that we really need to focus on. Teachers are doing a brilliant job. They're helping our kids catch up from the pandemic. Obviously, they've delivered now about 3 million catch-up lessons and tutoring, and they're doing the most amazing job, but we need children in school. Now, luckily, obviously, the head teachers' unions, one of the teachers' unions and the teaching assistant unions have not voted for strike action. So it's only one of the teachers' unions that has, and we issued guidance last night to head teachers to try and, well, hopefully we can keep as many schools open as possible for as many children as possible. But you won't be able to keep all of them open, will you? I mean, what's the message to a mum on a 0 hours contract who has to take time off work because she can't send her child to school because it's shut? It's deeply disappointing. I am very disappointed. I'm disappointed in the one union that has decided to go on strike. Our children don't deserve it, to be honest. We do need to keep teachers and children in school. And I will work with, you don't need to strike to get my attention. I will meet with people. I'll be as constructive as possible. But we do need to be fair. And the number one thing we need to do is tackle inflation. I've said that to you before. There's no point. What we need to do is halve inflation. That's obviously what we've said we'll do, and go further beyond, more than that. OK, talk to me about the gender reform bill. Nicola Sturgeon said the decision by Rishi Sunak to block Scotland's gender reform bill is a full frontal attack on our democratically elected Scottish Parliament and its ability to make its own decisions on devolved matters. What do you think? Well, I wouldn't agree with that. I mean, the Scotland Act deliberately was set up with this power in it. And I think it was set up about 25 years ago, anticipating that there could be times when legislation, when it looked a bit messy or there was legislation that could potentially be competing. And it was set up, it was legislation written by a Labour government, voted for by the SNP. So everybody agreed on the Scotland Act and the structure of it and the fact that there would be this power and when it was to be used. And obviously what we can't have is, a lack of clarity in law in terms of, gender recognition, having two sort of schemes in place across Great Britain. So but I don't understand those comments because it was something they voted for. It was deliberately designed in the Scotland Act to help us navigate where there were any of these sort of difficulties or things that were less clear. Would you be content for children in your schools at 16 to be able to say that they wanted to change their gender and be able to do that? We have to be very sensitive to children. It's not. We are actually going to publish some guidance and consult because it is a very tricky area to get right. It has to be age appropriate, but children have to be supported as well. So I think do you think 16 is too young? Well, the key thing will be to have that discussion through the consultation. But what do you think? No, I don't actually. I think 16. I was working at 16. I was paying tax at 16. could make decisions for myself at 16. But it's not really about what I think. It's how we make sure we get that right balance of supporting children, but also making sure that what they're getting taught in schools is age appropriate.
I'm sure you've got a view on this. How can we have faith in our police force when one of them has just admitted to 49 charges, including 24 rapes?
It's unbelievable. It's really shocking and appalling case, and obviously the first thoughts are to the victims, many victims and their families. And yeah, it's really deeply shocking, actually.
So what should the Met be doing about it?
Well, I think I mean, obviously the Met has come out and they've apologised. They've said they've done a lot in terms of their vetting procedures. There's more they're doing. I think they've referred themselves to this case to the independent police organisation as well. But clearly they've got some work to do. They do. It's really, really important that we have that trust in our police. And of course, you know, high sort of profile cases like this or Wayne Couzens does damage that. And so I think the police have more to do, and the Met Police have said that they're going to be doing that.
OK. It's good to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed for taking the time
Thank
this
you.
morning. Thank you. First teachers' strike we are expecting on the 1st of February, unless the talks planned for tomorrow yield something. Let's wait and see on that one. Let's see what the papers are saying this morning, should we? The Metro leads with the fallout after a serving Metropolitan Police officer, just talking about that with the Education Secretary, David Carrick, admitted committing 49 offences, including 24 counts of rape. It's also the main story for The Guardian newspaper. The Mirror saying that the force had 9 chances to stop David Carrick but failed to act every time. The Eye reports that around 800 Met officers are under investigation for alleged sexual and domestic abuse. The Mail puts that figure at closer to 1,600. In other news, The Times focused on the new round of teachers' strikes announced. First one, as I said, 1st of February, saying it will hit millions of pupils. Tamara's here. Morning. Thoughts?
Morning, Kay. Well, Gillian Keegan says that she met with union leaders for over an hour, but didn't come to a resolution.
Yeah, she said they did talk money.
They did talk money, but not money this year, which is what the teachers want. They talked about next year's pay review. They talked about the issue of pay in general, but she said they didn't negotiate on this year because the government's view is that they offered the teachers a 5% rise, which is above what they've had in many previous years. And for the newest, lowest paid teachers, it was up to over 8%. So they're saying that they were given a generous pay rise. It's not to say that they won't be struggling with the cost of living like everybody else is, but they've said that what the National Education Union have asked for at 12% is far too much. So doesn't sound like they put a pay, rather like with the nurses dispute, it's not like they want to talk about this year's pay. They are looking at the pay review process for next year, which the government will submit evidence for to come in April. I think there's also, interestingly, talking to people in government, they're quite keen to say that the teachers, for example, had a more generous pay rise last year than, for example, the nurses did. So they're quite keen to say that these disputes should be treated differently. But parents looking at this will think 7 days potentially of schools being closed in England and Wales, return to online learning, all the difficulties of the pandemic, all the difficulties with childcare and getting to work on those days, and thinking, should the government have perhaps done more?
Yeah, but what I don't understand is Mary Bowstead, the General Secretary of the NEU, the National Education Union, was sat exactly where you are, exactly where the Secretary of State for Education was sitting just a moment ago. She said they didn't talk about pay for this year or next year, and the Education Secretary is saying they did.
Also dispute on how long the meeting lasted, whether it was actually a friendly meeting or not. I think for the unions, the whole dispute hinges on whether they're talking about this year's pay. The government have effectively ruled out raising public sector pay this year and any kind of one-off payment to make up the shortfall. There's also a question of whether any pay rise above what's already been negotiated would come out of existing budgets, so schools would have to cut costs in other ways. The unions say they shouldn't have to, and the government should just put in more money over and above that. The government clearly are reluctant to give in on this, and I think they're just going to let these strikes go ahead. There are more talks with the unions and Gillian Keegan tomorrow, but it doesn't sound as if what they want is going to be on the table.
No, it certainly doesn't, does it? Let's see. We get 2 accounts of what happened after that meeting. Let's see. for now. Tomorrow, thank you. Tomorrow's Take, of course, at 9 o'clock. Looking forward to it. Thank you. Also talking about gender identity with the Minister. The government has said it will block gender recognition legislation that's been passed in Scotland. The law, which was passed in December, makes it easier for people to change their gender without needing to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. Yesterday, I spoke to trans campaigner Ellie Gomersall before the decision was announced. Can you, when you are 16 years old, know that this sort of decision that will change your life forever is the right one?
I think you absolutely can. I mean, I certainly did. I didn't come out until I was 18, but I think I always knew that I was trans. And actually, there's so many young trans kids who have transitioned, some of them at primary school and have lived, the vast majority of their lives by the time that they're 16 in their new gender. What's really important when we're talking about this particular bill is that all it is about updating your birth certificate. That's all that the gender recognition certificate does.
Amanda standing by for us now. Amanda, why has Rishi Sunak decided to overrule Nicola Sturgeon?
Well, this is a decision which is highly controversial, being described by some as the nuclear option, the first time in 25 years of devolution that the Westminster government have used this power to overrule a law approved by the Scottish Parliament. Now, the Gender Recognition Reform Act makes it easier for people to change their gender without the need for a medical diagnosis and reduces the age at which you can start that process of applying for a certificate from the age of 18 to the age of 16. Now, the Scottish Secretary, Alistair Jack, was very careful in his wording in making this announcement yesterday for all the ideological divides over this question, insisting that this was a decision taken after legal advice on basically for administrative reasons because of the impact this legislation in Scotland would have on UK-wide equalities legislation with potential problems in terms of prisons, schools, benefits as well, because people who've changed their gender in Scotland wouldn't necessarily have changed their legal gender in the rest of the UK. Also concerns about the impact on same-sex places. Obviously, the Scottish government extremely angry about being overridden by the UK authorities. Legal action is looking likely, a very different tone from Rishi Sunak's charm offensive we saw in Scotland last week.
Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show here on Sky News. Let's get more now on the accelerated misconduct hearing for PC David Carrick, which will take place later this morning after the serving Metropolitan Police officer yesterday admitted to dozens of offences against women, including 24 counts of rape over 18 years. It sparked calls for another culture change in policing. Let's talk about it, should we? Former Scotland Yard Detective Superintendent Shabnam Chowdhury is with us now. Hi.
Good morning.
How surprised were you?
Honestly, it was absolutely shocking. Shocking to hear of the allegations, the fact that he'd come to notice at least 9 previous occasions for misconduct matters, for domestic abuse, for harassment, and all of those were not either investigated or no further action taken, no criminal action taken against him, which allowed him to continue for 17 years to violently rape and abuse 12 females.
I suppose one of the arguments might be that none of those involved wanted to press charges, but that's not good enough, is it?
It's not good enough because we have victims we can have victimless prosecutions. You've got to look at the evidence, and I think the opportunities, particularly within policing, when you are an officer who hold the power within office, then you have a higher bar of professionalism. So really, they should have been looked into. There were a catalogue of incidents, and for some reason, the Metropolitan Police didn't seem to join up the dots. Didn't seem to work out. I know that officers get relentlessly pursued for misconduct matters, for much lesser matters, and I'm not saying that that's wrong. The fact is, when you've got an officer who's been subjected or been accused of these kind of offences and he slips through the net, and let's not forget he was also vetted on 2 separate occasions, knowing that these allegations were in the background somewhere.
Another 1,600 allegations, officers and staff that work for the Met. What's wrong with the Met?
Well, I've tried to look at the positive side of that because Sir Mark Rowley has introduced this hotline. Now, it may be that this hotline that the public can call into...
He's the Commissioner.
The Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley, apologies, yeah. It may be that that may have increased the numbers of officers, or the fact is that the Met are now really seriously looking at the allegations that are coming in and actually investigating them properly and more robustly.
What's he going to do? Is the jury still out? And I know that Sir Mark has only been in post a short time, but he's going to have to root out these bad apples quickly.
Well, he's going to have to root out the bad apples very quickly. And let's be honest, I've heard this all before. It's early days. I'm liking what I'm hearing. Many people are liking what they're hearing, but actions speak louder than words. And I think the next year will determine how he's actually doing. Let's not forget the Met are still in special measures. They've got to come out of special measures. They've got to root out the rotten apples within policing. That is going to take time. He's got to change the culture of the organisation. That is also going to take time.
Remind us of your experience of the Met.
Fantastic experiences, but also some very, very challenging experiences subjected to race throughout my career, for being a whistleblower in my early days. And I know that the impact that can have on officers who do fear speaking out. I spoke out, that followed me for the rest of my entire service, and it did have an impact on me. But in other respects, I had a really fantastic, amazing career.
Carrick, it's thought there are probably other victims out there too scared to come forward. If you read what he did to some of these women, you can see why, locking them under stairs, urinating on them, telling them that they belonged to him. What would you say to other women who feel that they have been abused by him but have been reluctant so far to come forward?
Please come forward. You know, I know that the trust in the Met Police is broken, but this is about the victims. This is about the victims getting justice. And I urge any female to still try and put their faith in police and try and come forward and report any allegations of abuse, sexual abuse, violence, because the fact is, some of these will result in fatalities if they don't get the right support out there.
And what would you say to young people who had been considering... I've got a friend who's just become a detective in the Met. I often think about her when these sort of things happen. She very much enjoys her job, but, you know, this is a stain on the Metropolitan Police. Why should other young people come forward and join the Met?
Look, it is a good career, but you've got to be part of that change if you want to see that change. I've got 2 nephews. I've got a 3rd nephew who's now going through the vetting process. I would never stop them or try to discourage them from joining, because I want them to make a difference within policing. You need an organisation that represents the communities it serves. That includes females, people of all different backgrounds, so that policing can be better, so that people can have that trust and confidence for the organisations across the UK to be able to report, to investigate crimes and to make communities safer, basically.
45,000 officers, I think, in the Met at the moment. They're all going to be vetted again. How long is that going to take?
That's going to take a long time, OK, because the fact is, you know, these vetting processes that they have are not fit for purpose. Carrick got through in 2017. It wasn't robust enough. The Met are saying they have put some changes in place in order for those officers that do come to notice to be considered for re-vetting. But the fact is, when you've got a backlog of officers who have been in for years and years and years and have probably done all sorts of things on all sorts of social media networks, you see what goes on with anonymous police officers, with the way that police officers behave on social media, which means, or would indicate to me, there are some real issues within policing.
And to that end, you want a full inquiry, apparently, into the Met and how this case was allowed to happen. What sort of inquiry? Are you talking about a judicial inquiry? What sort of inquiry? What
I think
form would you
it
like
needs
it
to
to
be
take?
a public inquiry in the same way that they had the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, because it needs to be statutory. The fact is, this individual passed through the net. He raped 12 women over a period of 17 years. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but the Met Police allowed that to happen.
Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning to share your experiences and thoughts. Good to see you. Thank you. Bear with me 1 second, if you would. Meantime, the head of the UK Army has said that sending tanks and artillery guns to Ukraine to bolster the country's war effort will leave the British Army weaker. It comes after the Defence Secretary confirmed to MPs that the UK will send 14 Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine. Here's Deborah Haynes with more.
British tanks will soon be rolling into battle against Russian forces in Ukraine. A landmark moment and a major boost to Ukrainian firepower, along with British artillery guns and ammunition. The Defence Secretary announced the details in Parliament.
Today's package is an important increase to Ukraine's capabilities. It means they can go from existing to expelling Russian forces from Ukrainian soil.
But back on British soil, the UK's own ability to fight is looking increasingly feeble. The army already had a shortage of tanks and artillery, all in need of an upgrade. Now, a good chunk of that is either in Ukraine or heading there. In a sign of the gravity of the situation, the head of the army made this frank admission to his troops in an internal video message. Sky News has seen a copy of the transcript. Giving away these capabilities will leave us temporarily weaker as an army. There's no denying it. But ensuring Russia's defeat in Ukraine makes us safer. And as a leading member of NATO, the world's most powerful defensive alliance, we are protected by the principle of collective defence. General Sir Patrick Sanders also stressed the need to modernise the army in comments that appeared designed to put pressure on the new Prime Minister for more funds.
It would be pointless saying that the British Army could go and fight against Russia. We have next to no artillery, next to no tanks, next to no usable combat vehicles. You would be sending troops into harm's way where they would suffer.
As well as shock the world, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has demonstrated the need for strong defences. It's a lesson the UK surely can't afford to ignore. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Number of people killed in the Russian strike in the Ukrainian city of Dnipro has risen to 40. Volodymyr Zelensky has called for more support from allies, saying the attack emphasises how important it is to coordinate efforts and that the UK sending tanks is a good example of that.
What happened in Dnipro, the fact that Russia is preparing a new attempt to seize the initiative in the war, the fact that the nature of the fighting and the front requires new solutions in defence supply, all this only emphasises how important it is to coordinate our efforts, of all members of the Defence Coalition of Ukraine and Freedom, as well as speed up decision-making. Today is a good example from Great Britain. A new defence aid package has been announced, just what is needed. Tanks, other armoured vehicles, artillery, what we discussed with the Prime Minister.
Kevin Spacey has picked up a Lifetime Achievement Award in Italy just days after appearing in a UK court to deny allegations of sexual assault. In his first official speaking engagement since the sexual assault allegations came to light, the 63-year-old visited the city of Turin, where he was honoured with an award for contributing to the growth of cinema. The two-time Academy Award winner taught a masterclass before introducing the 1999 film American Beauty, which he starred in. Kevin Spacey is scheduled to go on trial in London in June. Now, forecasters say days of rain and flood will be followed by snow and ice as temperatures reach freezing conditions. It comes as police warn people in the southwest of England to only travel if absolutely essential. Joining us now is Helen Roberts, meteorologist at the Met Office. Hi, Helen. Good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme this morning. How bad is it? How bad is it going to get?
Yes, as you say, we have seen some significant snow across parts of southwest England overnight, as well as many other parts of the country as well, particularly Scotland, and especially above 100 metres or so, where there is significant snow and likely to be more over the coming days. And the warnings that we have in force at the moment, they're likely to change, so do keep an eye. They could be updated or even escalated at any time. But we're looking at snow and ice quite widely across much of the UK, particularly areas away from the far inland parts of the country.
OK, what's causing this wave of bad weather?
Well, it's, as with most of our weather, it's all down to the position of the jet stream. We are very much on the cold side of that at the moment. The reason for the snow in southwest England last night was a small area of low pressure that tracked across the country. But across much of the UK, we have a northerly winds direction, which is cold, and it's bringing those snow showers, those wintry showers, a mix of sleet and snow quite widely across the UK, but particularly across northern parts and coastal areas.
Which areas should be getting their flood barriers ready?
Interesting question. So at the moment, most of our precipitation will be falling as snow, so not too much of an issue for the time being. But later in the week, and more especially into the weekend, we do start to see a return of rainfall. And as you imply, there's a lot of very saturated ground across the country at the moment. So that's one we're keeping an eye on when we start to see milder conditions returning and a more westerly regime, which is likely to bring some rain in from the west through the course of the weekend and into the early part of next week. So that's certainly one that we'll be keeping an eye on.
Can we blame global warming for this?
That's a really interesting question. Probably not directly for this particular weather setup, but it is something that we look closely at the Met Office. We have a science called event attribution, where we assess whether a particular weather event is more likely or less likely because of climate change, and that's a new and developing science. I would imagine for this particular event, probably not. As you would imagine, it tends to be more the warming and the extreme events that are attributable to climate change.
And I've been reading up about El Nino and La Nina. I think that's how I pronounce them both.
That's right, yeah.
Yeah, so they are apparently likely to cause us an extreme heat warning this year. Tell me a bit more about that.
So these are global drivers, as they're often known. Global because they can influence the weather across the globe. But the El Nino and La Nina originate in the Pacific, and they can cause different impacts in different parts of the world. And in the UK, so we're in La Nina at the moment, and that can often mean that we will see wetter weather towards the end of winter. So that, again, is something we're keeping a close eye on. There is the potential for some wet and stormy and probably quite mild weather later this winter. Obviously, that doesn't also exclude the potential for further cold snaps as well, but that is the trend that we're looking at. So, yeah, one that we're keeping an eye on.
OK, but more pressing matters, of course, what's happening with the weather today and for the rest of the week. We know that there's some problems with ice and snow. What would you suggest people need to do over the next few days? What would you do if you were in the southwest of England, or indeed if you were up in the wilds of Scotland?
I would certainly leave extra time for any travel. If you're traveling by car, then just take a few extra bits and pieces with you. Make sure you have some water, perhaps a hot drink, a coat, a blanket, maybe even a snow shovel, particularly if you're in Scotland. Just be extra prepared and extra vigilant. Do keep an eye on the forecasts and warnings. And if you're traveling by public transport, then do just allow a little bit of extra time and check before you go.
Are we all going to see snow?
Sorry.
Are we all going to see snow?
No, not all of us. Many inland areas, so parts of the Midlands, for example, may not see any of these snow showers at all, but they could affect just about anywhere. It's just that they're more likely in the north and around more coastal areas.
And looking a little bit further forward, are we going to have a bitter winter?
Well, so we're halfway through winter at the moment, and so far it's been on the mild side with the exception of the first 2 weeks of December. This is a fairly transitory blip in the temperatures. As I said, we will start to return to something nearer normal as we head through the course of the weekend. We can't rule out further colder snaps, but the trend is probably for something milder than average rather than colder than average overall.
OK, good to talk to you. Thanks for your expertise. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks. And with parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions, let's have a look at the impact of climate change on the planet. The right half, there you go, over there, that shows what we're using with our power mix. Currently using a bit of coal, actually, today. We haven't normally seen that. Perhaps illustrates just how cold it is. And then here on the left-hand side, that shows how much the planet has increased in temperature since 1880, and also the CO2 emissions in millions of tonnes. All real-time dashboard. Now, Queen has been voted 2022's Children's Word of the Year. The Oxford University Press asked more than 4,000 children aged 6 to 14 what words they felt had been important to them. 46% chose Queen as their #1 following the death of Her Majesty, and the earlier celebration, of course, of the Platinum Jubilee. And the Royal Mint has unveiled its first bullion coin with the portrait of King Charles. The King's effigy will appear on the 2023 bullion Britannia gold coin, marking a new chapter for the Royal Mint. And whose birthday do you think it is today? Michelle Obama. She is celebrating her 59th birthday today. Many, many happy returns to her.